Chapter 1. Night Watch in the Appalachians. October descended upon the Appalachian mountain range, shrouding its foothills in a thick, damp fog. The days grew shorter, the nights longer and colder, filling the air with the scent of decaying leaves and damp earth. In this remote, heavily wooded terrain, where the nearest semblance of civilization lay dozens of miles down winding roads, stood scattered, isolated farms. In recent weeks, their owners had reported livestock missing with increasing frequency. Not just one or two stray sheep, but entire cows vanishing without a trace from fenced pastures. Added to this were accounts of strange, unsettling sounds echoing from the depths of the forest at night, sounds unlike the howl of coyotes or the growl of black bears, the usual denizens of these parts. John, a man of 55, a veteran of several unnamed conflicts, and for the past 2 decades, a ranger in this national park, regarded such reports with a healthy dose of skepticism. His experience told him the likely culprits were predators exhibiting increased activity, perhaps a pack of feral dogs or unusually bold coyotes. Rumors of werewolves or woods people, whispered among some of the old-timers in the nearest town, he dismissed as nothing more than local folklore born of isolation and the darkness of long nights. Nevertheless, the reports required investigation. Tonight, John was making an extra patrol through the sector where livestock disappearances had been particularly frequent. His old pickup truck remained at the base of the hill. Beyond it, only a barely discernible trail led onward. He carried his trusty .30 .06 Springfield rifle, a powerful rubber-encased flashlight capable of cutting a beam through hundreds of yards of darkness, and a radio tuned to the Park Service frequency. Pushing deeper into the forest, John meticulously scanned the damp soil in the flashlight's beam. The trail grew fainter, yielding to a thick carpet of fallen leaves. And then he saw them. Tracks. They were enormous, unnervingly large. The print was oval, yet possessed clear indentations from 5 toes ending in something akin to claws. The track measured over 15 inches long and nearly 8 inches wide. No wolf, no coyote, not even the largest black bear could have left such impressions. Furthermore, the depth to which the tracks pressed into the soft earth indicated a creature of substantial weight. John knelt, carefully examining one of the prints. There were no other tracks nearby, only these laid out in a single line as if the creature moved on 2 legs. He rose, sweeping the flashlight beam ahead, trying to follow the chain, but it vanished into the dense undergrowth. Suddenly, the sharp crack of branches shattered the silence. The sound came from somewhere above, perhaps 20 feet off the ground. John snapped his head up, directing the flashlight beam into the tree canopy. Nothing. But the sound repeated a little farther off now, as though something massive and heavy was moving through the branches, leaping from tree to tree with unnatural agility. The ranger tried to reach base on his radio. Only loud static, punctuated by occasional clicks, answered him. No signal. The air around him seemed to thicken, growing heavy, stagnant. A strange foul odor arose, a mixture of the sharp stench of wet dog and a metallic cloying sweetness John knew all too well from his time in the service. The smell of blood. He moved forward toward an old, abandoned sawmill that appeared as a dark silhouette through the trees about half a mile away. It was from that direction, he thought, that the smell emanated. Approaching, he tried to step as quietly as possible. Near the dilapidated structure, his flashlight beam caught movement. In the clearing before the sawmill lay the carcass of a cow, the very one that had disappeared from the Henderson farm 2 days prior. Hunched over it was an enormous, stooped creature. It was covered in thick, dark fur that blended with the night shadows. It stood at least 7 feet tall, even in its hunched posture. Its disproportionately long, powerful limbs were especially striking. The front paws, which it used to tear at the cow's flesh, ended in something disturbingly similar to human hands, but enormous, and tipped with thick black claws several inches long. The creature abruptly raised its head, startled by the flashlight beam. 2 eyes flared yellow-green fire in the light. Its muzzle was elongated, lupine, yet distorted in a grimace of primal fury. From its maw, framed by black lips, protruded rows of long, sharp teeth stained with blood. A low, guttural growl rumbled from its chest. For a moment John froze, paralyzed by the sight. All his rational explanations crumbled to dust before this monstrous reality. But decades of training and the instinct for self-preservation took over. He snapped the rifle up, centered the massive shoulder in his sights, and squeezed the trigger. The roar of the shot ripped through the night silence. The bullet struck true. The creature let out a deafening bellow, a horrific fusion of a wolf's howl, a bear's roar, and a piercing human scream of pain and fury. It staggered but did not fall. Instead, it spun and charged directly at John, covering the distance with unthinkable speed. The ranger took a step back, frantically working the bolt action to reload. He fired again, but in his haste and rising panic, the bullet went wide, ricocheting off a rock near the creature. Run. The only thought left in his mind. John turned and bolted back toward the trail, back toward the pickup. Behind him, he heard heavy footfalls, the crash of breaking branches, and the furious gurgling snarl of his rapidly closing pursuer. He ran without regard for the path, stumbling over roots, branches whipping across his face. His lungs burned. His heart hammered somewhere in his throat. The pickup was close now, visible through the trees. One last burst of speed. He reached the truck, yanked the handle, threw himself inside, and immediately hit the door lock button. In the same instant, something heavy slammed onto the truck's roof with immense force, leaving a visible dent in the metal. John frantically turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life. He jammed the gas pedal to the floor, and the pickup, tires squealing, shot forward onto the rutted forest road, bouncing violently over the uneven ground. Only after reaching the paved highway and driving several miles did John allow himself to ease off the accelerator. He was shaking uncontrollably. His hands on the steering wheel were sticky with blood. Not his blood. It must have splashed onto him when the creature was close. His rifle was still back there near the sawmill. He returned the next day, but not alone. 2 county sheriff's deputies were with him. The area near the sawmill looked like a struggle had taken place. They found John's spent rifle casings. They found bloodstains. Analysis later showed John's blood type, as well as the presence of other biological material classified by the lab as unidentified, possible contaminated animal sample. They found the ranger's discarded rifle, stained with blood on the stock. The cow carcass had vanished without a trace. The huge, strange tracks led from the clearing deep into the impenetrable thicket, where they were lost on rocky ground. The official police report read, "Attack by large predator, presumed black bear or coyote pack, on park ranger. Animal was wounded and escaped. John's testimony about a bipedal creature was attributed to shock and stress. John submitted his resignation a week later. He moved out of the ranger cabin and into a small trailer on the outskirts of the nearest town. He was plagued by insomnia and panic attacks triggered by any sudden noise at night. Most people, including his former colleagues, didn't believe his story, considering it a fabrication or the result of severe stress. Only a couple of local old-timers, upon hearing his account, nodded gravely and recalled old legends of creatures dwelling in the deepest corners of the Appalachians. John became a recluse. He began collecting and studying all available materials on local folklore, Cherokee legends, and eyewitness reports of woods people or dog-like creatures. He was certain that what he had encountered was neither a bear nor a figment of his imagination. It was real, and it could return. Beside his bed now always stood a loaded 12-gauge pump-action shotgun. Chapter 2. The Farm on the Great Plains. The vast expanse of the Great Plains stretched to the horizon, where sky met earth in a hazy line. Here, far from bustling cities and busy highways, only fields and sparse islands of farmland dotted the landscape for miles around. One such farm belonged to the Miller family. David, his wife Martha, and their 2 teenage children, a son and a daughter. Their house and outbuildings stood alone, the nearest neighbors 5 miles to the east, their lights barely visible on a clear night. This night was not clear. A severe thunderstorm, a harbinger of autumn, bore down from the west. Bright flashes of lightning split the sky, followed by deafening peals of thunder. The wind gusted furiously, whipping the trees near the house and howling in the chimney. Shortly before midnight, another flash illuminated the surroundings, and instantly the lights went out. The storm had damaged the power line. The house plunged into darkness, broken only by the lightning flashes and the dim flame of a kerosene lamp Martha managed to light. Outside in the yard, their dog, an old loyal blue heeler named Baxter, barked incessantly. His barks were unusually frantic, strained, filled less with anger than with fear. Through the howling wind and the drumming rain on the roof, other sounds reached David's ears. Something strange, drawn out, not quite a howl, not quite a moan, low and deep, vibrating in the air. The sound originated from the prairie, drawing closer to the house. Baxter barked even more desperately, choking on the sound. Then came a short, piercing yelp that cut off abruptly. An ominous silence fell, broken only by the raging storm. David went to the living room window, pulling back the edge of the curtain. Another flash of lightning momentarily lit the yard. What he saw sent a chill down his spine. The gate leading from the road into the yard, usually securely latched, had been torn from its hinges and lay on the ground. Baxter was nowhere in sight. In that same instant, out of the corner of his eye, David caught movement. Something large, dark, and massive darted between the barn and the house, disappearing into the shadows. He recoiled from the window. Martha. Kids. To the cellar now. His voice was hoarse, strained. Martha, asking no questions, grabbed the frightened teenager's hands and led them toward the heavy oak door in the corner of the kitchen that led downstairs. David lunged for the wall near the entrance, where his old 12-gauge double-barreled shotgun hung on special hooks. He snatched the gun, checked the shells. 2 rounds of heavy buckshot. At that moment, a deafening blow struck the front door. The thick wood groaned, the doorframe shuddering. David retreated several steps, raising the shotgun to his shoulder, aiming at the center of the door. Another blow followed, even harder. The door flew off its hinges, hurtling into the room and crashing onto the floor. Framed in the opening, illuminated by lightning flashes, stood a figure. An enormous creature resembling a nightmarish fusion of man and wolf. It stood on powerful hind legs reaching nearly 7 feet tall. Its body was covered in thick, dark gray fur, soaked and matted by the rain, water streaming off it. Its long muzzle was bared in a snarl, revealing rows of formidable fangs dripping saliva mixed with rainwater. Its eyes burned in the dimness with a yellowish, malevolent fire. The creature emitted a low, guttural growl that made the window panes tremble. Acting more on instinct than reason, David pulled both triggers simultaneously. The double blast of buckshot struck the creature squarely in the chest from only a few yards away. A deafening roar of pain and fury erupted. The creature staggered back onto the threshold, but did not fall. Clumps of fur flew outward. A ragged wound gaped on its chest, dark blood flowing, but the shot seemed only to have enraged it further. It stepped back into the house, extending a clawed paw toward David. He backed toward the cellar door, where his family had already taken refuge. He managed to slam the heavy oak door shut just a second before the creature reached it. He threw the massive steel bolt, praying it would hold. Heavy blows immediately rained down from the other side. Huddled together in the damp, earth-smelling cellar, the Miller family listened to the sounds from above. Something heavy paced through the house, overturning and breaking furniture. They heard the splintering of wood, the shattering of glass. Periodically, the creature let out a furious, drawn-out howl that chilled the blood. The siege lasted for hours. No one in the cellar dared utter a word, sitting breathless, listening to the destruction overhead, praying the door would hold. Only when the first pale rays of dawn began to filter through the small cellar window did the sounds above gradually subside. The Millers sat in silence for another hour, afraid to move. Finally, David cautiously slid the bolt back and cracked the door open. The house was quiet. They emerged from the cellar. The scene before them was appalling. The living room and kitchen were utterly demolished. Furniture was overturned and smashed, curtains torn down. Shards of pottery and glass littered the floor. Large, muddy paw prints, unlike those of any human or known animal, marked the wooden floor. Amid the mud were dark stains of blood, not theirs. The yard looked equally ravaged. The broken gate, overturned flower pots. Baxter was gone, not dead, not alive. He had simply vanished. The sheriff and his deputy, summoned by phone, surveyed the house and yard at length, shaking their heads and taking notes. They documented the significant property damage. Around the house they found the same strange, enormous tracks leading from the threshold toward the prairie, disappearing into the tall grass a few hundred yards away. The official version, stated later, was an attack by a pack of stray dogs or coyotes, possibly rabid. Their aggressive behavior could have been provoked by the severe storm and darkness. David's shotgun blast, police surmised, likely only wounded one of the animals, further angering the pack. The Millers tried to describe the creature they had seen in the doorway, but their words were met with disbelief. The sheriff gently suggested that in the darkness, in a state of shock, and influenced by the raging storm. They might have mistaken a large dog for something else. The only tangible clue consisted of a few tufts of coarse grayish-brown fur found snagged on a splintered piece of the doorframe. Lab analysis failed to identify them as belonging to any known local predator. The result was marked unidentified. A month later, the Miller family sold the farm for half its value. They moved to a small town in another state, trying to forget that night. Their youngest daughter, who had witnessed the beginning of the attack, stopped speaking and remained silent for nearly 3 months, communicating only through gestures. David was tormented by guilt over Baxter and the persistent memories of the terror he felt facing the creature. Martha constantly checked the locks on doors and windows, even during the day. They never spoke of the details of that night again, as if fearing the words themselves might bring the nightmare back. Chapter 3. Shadow on Campus. The Midwestern University town sank into the cool autumn night. Lampposts along the campus pathways lit up, casting uneven circles of yellow light onto the asphalt slick with drizzling rain. Most students had already dispersed to their dormitories or local bars. Sarah, a 19-year-old sophomore, had stayed late at the library, studying for an upcoming exam. Now, she was heading back to her dorm, taking a shortcut through the park area bordering the edge of campus. The place had a dark reputation. Over the past decade, 2 students had vanished there under mysterious circumstances, and several others had reported attacks or being followed after dark. Campus police had increased patrols, but the park remained large and, in places, poorly lit. The lights here burned dimly, some were broken, and dense thickets of shrubs and old trees created numerous dark, secluded corners. The rain intensified, shifting from a light drizzle to a persistent cold shower. Sarah pulled her jacket tighter and quickened her pace, feeling uneasy in the deserted park. Suddenly she heard footsteps behind her. Someone was walking on the asphalt path behind her. The steps were measured but heavy. Sarah turned around. The path behind her was empty. Only wet leaves swirled in the light of a distant lamp post. She attributed the sound to the echo of her own steps or her imagination, but the unsettling feeling persisted. She felt like she was being watched. Somewhere in the dense bushes to her right there was a soft rustle, the snap of a twig. Sarah glanced that way again, but saw only a dark mass of wet leaves. Yet she caught a flicker of movement. Something dark and shapeless slid between the trees, moving parallel to her, remaining hidden in the shadows. Anxiety mounted. Sarah broke into a near run, her heart pounding. The dorm was close now, its brightly lit windows visible. She had just passed the darkest section of the park when she heard very close, practically over her right shoulder, quiet, ragged breathing like a wheeze. She stopped abruptly and spun around. On the path only a few yards away stood a figure. At first, in the dim light, she mistook it for a very tall man bundled in a dark cloak or long coat. The figure stood motionless, slightly hunched. Sarah wanted to scream, to call for help, but the sound caught in her throat. At that moment, the moon, briefly emerging from behind the tattered rain clouds, illuminated the scene, and Sarah witnessed the unimaginable. The figure before her began to change. It happened rapidly, convulsively. Its shoulders twitched, broadened with a loud, tearing, cracking sound that ripped through the heavy fabric of its clothing. Its head thrust forward, the face elongating, sharpening, transforming into a lupine muzzle. Its hands, previously hidden in sleeves, stretched out, fingers contorting, sprouting dark fur, nails lengthening into sharp black claws. There was a sickening crunch of bone and the sound of tearing flesh and fabric. The cloak or coat, whatever it was, split down the back, revealing powerful muscles covered in short, dark fur. The entire process took no more than 10 seconds, but to Sarah, it felt like an eternity. Before her now stood a creature nearly 7 feet tall, with the head of a wolf, a powerful torso, and long limbs ending in clawed paws. Its eyes burned in the moonlight with a malevolent yellow fire. Icy terror seized Sarah, but the instinct to survive proved stronger. She spun around and sprinted with all her might toward the dormitory. A piercing scream finally tore from her throat. She heard heavy, rapid footsteps behind her, the click-clack-clack of claws on wet asphalt, and a low, furious growl. She didn't dare look back, terrified of seeing her pursuer right behind her. The brightly lit entrance to the dorm was only a few dozen yards away. One final push. She burst through the glass doors of the lobby, stumbled over the threshold, and collapsed onto the tiled floor. The world went dark. The security guard on duty, an older man named Frank, heard the scream and the crash at the entrance. He ran over and found Sarah lying unconscious on the floor, soaked to the bone and trembling. He called campus security and an ambulance. When Sarah regained consciousness, she was hysterical. She wept, screamed, tried to explain something, but her words were jumbled. She spoke of a man who had turned into a beast right before her eyes, of being chased, of burning eyes and claws. The arriving paramedics diagnosed her with an acute stress reaction and shock. She was taken to the campus health center. Campus police and security officers thoroughly searched the park area. They found Sarah's footprints on the wet asphalt and mud near the bushes, but no other prints, especially none that could have been left by an enormous creature, were discovered. The rain, police concluded, had likely washed away any evidence. The official version of the incident settled on an assault by an unknown individual, possibly a robber or a harasser who had severely frightened the student. Her account of the transformation was dismissed as hallucinations brought on by extreme fear and darkness. Sarah insisted on her story, but no one believed her. Professors nodded sympathetically. The campus psychologist spoke of post-traumatic stress. No one took her words seriously. A few days after the incident, Sarah began noticing a particular male student. He was in a different department. She had seen him fleetingly before, but didn't know his name. Tall, well-built, with dark hair and piercing eyes. He often looked at her, in the cafeteria, in the hallways, around campus. There was something unhealthy, predatory in his gaze. One day she noticed a fresh, still healing scar on the back of his right hand, 3 parallel deep scratches as if made by claws. A scar that looked like it could have resulted from a struggle. Sarah couldn't continue her in-person classes. She transferred to remote learning, rarely leaving her dorm room. Paranoia haunted her. She constantly felt watched, convinced the student with the scar was stalking her. She was terrified to go outside after dark. Nightmares plagued her sleep. She started gathering information about the students who had disappeared near campus, searching for any clues, any mention of strange incidents in the park. She was certain she hadn't hallucinated. Her suspicion of the student with the scar grew stronger each day, but she had no proof. Only her memories of that terrifying night in the park and the 3 sinister scratches on his hand. Chapter 4. Roadside Nightmare in the Pacific Northwest. The dense forests of the Pacific Northwest pressed in on the highway from both sides, a solid wall of ancient firs and spruces. The night was clear, a full moon bathing the narrow ribbon of asphalt snaking through the hills in silvery light. Jack, a trucker with years of experience, 42 years old, steered his 18-wheeler along this deserted highway. He was heading north to Canada with a load of industrial goods. The nearest town was 100 miles behind him, the next still 70 miles ahead. There was no radio reception here, no cell service. Jack was alone with the road, the night, and the endless forest. Suddenly, the powerful diesel engine of his rig sputtered, lurched a couple of times, and died. The truck coasted for another few dozen yards on inertia before rolling to a stop on the shoulder. Jack swore. Looked like trouble with the fuel system. It had happened with this rig before. Nothing for it but to fix it himself. He switched on the hazard lights, their orange flashing disrupting the calm moonlight. Grabbing a flashlight and a toolbox from the cab, he climbed out. The cool night air was thick with the scent of pine needles and damp earth. It was quiet. Too quiet. Then, a long, blood-curdling howl ripped through the silence. It came from deep within the woods to the right of the road. It wasn't the howl of a wolf or the cry of a coyote. The sound was lower, deeper, carrying something primal, sinister. Jack felt a chill crawl up his spine. He scanned the surroundings, peering into the dark gaps between the tree trunks. He felt as if something or someone was watching him from the darkness. The unnerving sensation of a presence grew stronger. He tried to push the thoughts away, attributing the howl to some animal unfamiliar to him. He opened the hood and switched on the flashlight, trying to locate the fuel filter. At that moment, out of the corner of his eye, he caught movement on the road far behind the truck, maybe 100 yards back. Something very large and dark darted across the highway and vanished into the woods on the other side. A bear? A moose? It moved too quickly and somehow wrong. Jack refocused on the engine. He'd been tinkering under the hood for about 10 minutes when he heard a dull, heavy thud on the roof of the truck's cab. It sounded as if something incredibly massive had jumped down onto it. Jack looked up and turned toward the cab. Staring back at him through the windshield was a nightmarish visage. It was a grotesque fusion of wolf and human features. A long maw gaped open, revealing rows of huge yellowish fangs. Its eyes burned with a mad red fire in the moonlight. Thick, dark fur covered its head and shoulders. The creature let out a low growl and leaped from the roof directly onto the truck's hood. The thick metal buckled under its weight with a loud groan. Jack recoiled from the truck in horror. The creature, now standing on its hind legs on the hood, turned its head toward the driver's side window. It raised a forelimb, enormous, tipped with long black claws, and slammed it against the glass. The window cracked but held. The creature struck again, more violently. This time, the glass shattered into tiny fragments. A clawed paw reached inside the cab, groping in the darkness. Jack realized it was trying to open the door from the inside or grab him. Panic gave way to desperate resolve. He scrambled for the toolbox he'd left on the ground near the front tire and snatched out a heavy steel tire iron. The creature, not finding him in the cab, turned back toward him. It leaped off the hood onto the ground and advanced on Jack, emitting a gurgling snarl. Jack gripped the tire iron tighter. As the creature closed in, he swung with all his might, striking the clawed limb reaching for him. A deafening roar of pain and fury erupted. The creature jerked its limb back, a deep gash now visible where the tire iron had connected. That momentary pause saved Jack's life. He spun and ran, not down the road, but into the forest, seeking refuge in the saving darkness between the trees. He heard the creature roar and charge after him, but the trees and underbrush hindered its movement, preventing it from matching its speed on open ground. Jack plunged deep into the thicket, trying not to make a sound. He hid beneath the low-hanging branches of a large fir tree, holding his breath. He heard the creature return to the truck. There were sounds of impacts, the shriek of tearing metal, the tinkle of shattering headlights. It was venting its fury on the truck's cab. This went on for about 15 minutes. Then the sounds died down. Jack didn't dare emerge from his hiding place. He spent the rest of the night huddled under the tree, shivering from cold and the lingering terror. Every rustle in the woods made him jump. Only when the eastern sky began to lighten did he venture back to the road. The sight was grim. His truck was heavily damaged. The hood and cab roof were crumpled as if something incredibly heavy had jumped on them. The windshield and side windows were smashed. The driver's side door panel was shredded. Deep scratches marred the metal, clearly not made by ordinary tools, and unlike the claw marks of a bear. They were too deep, too precise. Jack started walking north along the highway. After about an hour, another trucker picked him up. He used his CB radio to call the state police and highway patrol. The arriving officers surveyed the damaged truck, photographed the damage and tracks. They listened to Jack's story, but treated it with skepticism. The official report cited vandalism by unknown persons or an attack by a large wild animal, possibly a grizzly bear attracted by something in the cab. There were few tracks around the truck besides Jack's own. The hard shoulder and asphalt didn't hold prints well. The officers advised Jack to take some time off and maybe watch fewer horror movies. The only physical evidence collected for analysis were a few tufts of dark, coarse fur snagged in the torn upholstery, and a saliva swab taken from the shards of the side window. The lab results came back weeks later. Biological material of animal origin, species undetermined. Jack could never return to his job. He quit the trucking company. The thought of night runs on deserted highways triggered panic attacks. Doctors diagnosed him with post-traumatic stress disorder. He moved to another state, far from the forests of the Pacific Northwest. Things he once dismissed as fiction and fairy tales now seemed terrifyingly real. He began searching online on forums dedicated to unexplained phenomena. There he found several anonymous stories, chillingly similar to his own, that had occurred in the same region of the Pacific Northwest. Stories of encounters with a huge, aggressive creature resembling a wolf, but walking on two legs. Chapter 5. The Frozen Terror of Dyatlov Pass. The northern Urals in February are a realm of silence, snow, and penetrating cold. Vast expanses blanketed in deep snow stretch for hundreds of miles. Here, in the region of Kolatsiakal Mountain, infamous for the 1959 deaths of Igor Dyatlov's hiking group, 3 experienced extreme tourists from Russia were trekking. Their names were Alexei, Sergei, and Olga. They were no strangers to winter expeditions, drawn both by the route's difficulty and the aura of mystery surrounding the place. They intended to follow the path of the Dyatlov group, to try and understand what might have happened on that slope decades ago. The weather, initially favorable, began to deteriorate rapidly. The temperature plummeted below -13 degrees Fahrenheit, -25 degrees Celsius. A fierce wind kicked up, and a blizzard began. Visibility dropped to a few dozen feet. Continuing across the exposed slope became perilous. According to their map, an old hunting cabin lay about 2 miles northeast of the pass. They decided to alter their route and attempt to reach it to wait out the storm. Pushing through the wall of snow and wind, they finally spotted the dark silhouette of a structure against the white curtain. The cabin stood in a small clearing surrounded by stunted, twisted trees. As they drew closer, they noticed strange tracks in the freshly fallen snow. Huge, elongated prints, resembling those of bare human feet, but much larger, at least 18 inches long, with distinct marks of long claws at the toes. The tracks were paired, the stride length indicating a tall creature. A line of tracks led from the forest to the cabin, circled it, and then headed back toward a denser wooded area. This was alarming. No bear, which should have been hibernating, nor wolverine could have left such tracks. The tourists approached the cabin itself. The door, made of thick planks, had been torn from its hinges and lay nearby. Inside, chaos reigned. An overturned table, scattered remnants of utensils. Dark stains, like frozen blood, marked the log walls and the trampled snow on the floor. Being here felt deeply unsettling. The decision was immediate. They needed to leave as quickly as possible, despite the blizzard. Better to risk the open slope than remain in this ominous place. They hastily departed the clearing and began descending the mountainside, trying to stay together. The blizzard intensified. The wind knocked them off balance. Snow plastered their eyes. They had been walking for about half an hour when, through the roar of the wind, a blood-curdling sound reached their ears. It was a drawn-out, terrifying howl filled with primal fury and anguish. It sounded incredibly close, somewhere behind them, and was so loud it momentarily drowned out the storm. Instinctively, the tourists turned. In the white swirl of snow, just 100 yards or so behind and above them on the slope, they saw 2 dark, tall figures. They were considerably taller than humans, massive, hunched, and they were closing fast, moving through the deep snow with unnatural ease and speed, seemingly without sinking. Panic seized the group. Forgetting caution, they bolted down the slope, plunging into snow drifts, stumbling, losing their balance. To move faster, they began shedding their heavy backpacks and ski poles. Alexei, bringing up the rear, was slightly slower. He tripped on a rock hidden beneath the snow and fell face first into a drift. Sergei and Olga, running ahead, turned at his cry. They saw one of the dark figures reach the fallen Alexei almost instantly. There was a short scream filled with inhuman terror, abruptly cut off. The second figure continued moving toward them. Without a second thought, Sergei grabbed Olga's hand, and they resumed their desperate flight downhill, running without stopping until their strength gave out. They fled, heedless of the path, through the blizzard and the night, driven by terror and the howl of the wind, which now seemed like a malevolent pursuit. Only 2 days later, nearly depleted, frostbitten, and in a state of profound shock, did Sergei and Olga stumble upon a temporary base set up by Emercom rescuers in the valley at the foot of the mountains. Their account was fragmented and horrifying. They spoke of an attack by enormous fur-covered creatures, snowmen or monsters, that had killed their friend and hunted them. A rescue operation was mounted immediately, as soon as the weather permitted. A helicopter transported a team of rescuers to the mountain slope. They found the tourists' campsite, the abandoned backpacks, and other gear. They found Sergei and Olga's tracks leading down the slope. No other tracks, neither the strange prints nor signs of a struggle, were found. The recent blizzard, the rescuers concluded, had completely obliterated any potential evidence. Alexei's body was discovered about half a mile from where the backpacks were abandoned. It was severely mutilated, torn apart. The nature of the injuries indicated an attack by a large predator, multiple lacerations, bite marks, broken bones. The official findings stated, mountain accident. Tourist fatality resulting from attack by wild animal, presumed hibernating bear roused from den or large wolverine. Animal aggression possibly provoked by human presence in its territory. The surviving Sergei and Olga's testimonies were noted, but their descriptions of monsters were attributed to stress, hypothermia, possible hallucinations, and the effects of so-called mountain sickness, known to cause psychological changes at high altitudes. However, during a more thorough examination of the deceased Alexei's clothing, forensic specialists discovered several long, coarse hairs of a dark brown color embedded in the fabric of his jacket. The hairs were sent for genetic analysis. The result was unexpected. The genetic material did not match any known animal species residing in the region or anywhere else. Officially, this was explained as possible sample contamination or a rare mutation of a known species. Sergei and Olga never returned to the mountains. Extreme tourism was forever relegated to their past. Olga underwent extensive psychotherapy, trying to cope with the aftermath of the horror and the loss of her friend. Sergei, however, became obsessed with the mystery of Dyatlov Pass and similar unexplained incidents. He began collecting all available materials, reports, and eyewitness accounts, seeking proof of scientifically unknown predators or beings inhabiting the remote, unexplored regions of the northern Urals. He believed what he had seen with his own eyes that terrible day on the snow-swept slope. Chapter 6. The Romanian Tourist Trap. The Carpathian Mountains in Romania beckoned with their wild beauty and aura of mysticism. Legends of strigoi, vampires, and werewolves, or varkolachi as the locals called them, had been passed down for centuries, attracting thrill-seekers and folklore enthusiasts. Emily and Mark, a young couple from Canada, were traveling through Eastern Europe in a rental car. Hearing about a small village lost deep in the mountains, known for its tales of lycanthropy, they decided to detour from the main tourist route and spend a couple of days there. The village was exactly as they had imagined. Old stone houses with tiled roofs, narrow streets, dense forests pressing right up to the outskirts. The locals, few in number and mostly elderly, greeted them warily, with poorly concealed mistrust. The village elder, learning they planned to camp in a tent near the woods, strongly advised against it, especially with the full moon approaching. "The forest is not a good place at night," he said in heavily accented English, "especially when the moon is full. Better you stay in the village." Emily and Mark politely thanked him for the advice, but privately decided it was just part of the local color, a way to spook tourists or persuade them to pay for lodging in one of the houses. They found a picturesque clearing on the edge of the forest, about a mile from the village, and pitched their tent. The mountain view was magnificent. As dusk settled, the atmosphere began to shift. The forest sank into deep shadows, and strange sounds emerged from its depths. At first it was just the snap of twigs and rustling, but then came a rhythmic low howling, unlike that of wolves. It sounded more like some ritualistic chant or incantation performed by multiple voices. The sound ebbed and flowed, creating an unsettling tension. Emily and Mark looked toward the forest. In the distance between the trees, they noticed the faint flicker of lights, like the glow of campfires. Their initial enthusiasm gave way to a prickle of unease. They sat by the tent, listening to the sounds of the night forest, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. Maybe the elder had been right, but curiosity overcame fear. They decided to move closer to the forest edge to try and see what was happening near the fires. Leaving the tent, they cautiously advanced toward the flickering lights, trying to remain silent. The moon rose high above the mountains, its bright light filtering through the branches, creating intricate patterns of light and shadow on the forest floor. Approaching the source of the sounds and light, they froze behind the trunk of a large beech tree and peered out. What they saw in the small clearing ahead sent ice through their veins. Several figures moved around a dying campfire. At first they appeared human, dressed in some sort of rags. But then these figures began to twitch strangely, contort, fall to the ground, and writhe in agony, their bodies visibly deformed. A hideous crunch of breaking bones echoed, accompanied by the sounds of tearing flesh and fabric. The figures grew larger, limbs elongating, backs hunching, bodies sprouting thick, dark fur. Heads stretched out, morphing into wolf-like muzzles. Inhuman screams of pain and fury ripped from their throats, transitioning into bestial snarls. The transformation was swift and horrifying. One of the creatures, now almost fully transformed into an enormous wolf, standing on its hind legs, sharply turned its head in their direction. It had seen them. Burning yellow eyes locked onto them through the gloom. A furious, menacing growl erupted. Emily and Mark needed no command. They spun and bolted back toward their tent and the car parked nearby. Terror lent them speed. They heard the heavy thud of several pursuers behind them and their vicious snarls. The forest, which had seemed beautiful and mysterious moments before, now felt like a hostile trap. Emily tripped on a root and fell. Mark stopped abruptly, hauled her up, and they ran on, not daring to look back. There was the clearing, their tent, the car. Mark fumbled frantically in his jacket pocket for the key. Found it. With trembling hands, he tried to insert it into the door lock. But the key wouldn't turn. It jammed. The creatures were terrifyingly close now, bursting from the trees into the clearing. One of them, the largest, was only yards away. In desperation, Mark slammed his fist against the car's side window. The glass shattered with a crash. Reaching inside, he fumbled for the central locking button and pressed it. Locks clicked. He pulled the handle from the inside, opening the door. "Quick!" He yelled at Emily. She scrambled into the passenger seat. Mark dove into the driver's seat after her. He turned the ignition key. The engine caught on the first try. Just as the car lurched forward, one of the creatures swiped a clawed paw across the rear bumper. Metal shrieked. Mark slammed the gas pedal to the floor. The car shot out of the clearing, bouncing over ruts and onto the dirt track leading back toward the village and the highway. They sped away, heedless of the road, until the lights of the sinister clearing vanished behind the trees. They didn't stop until they reached the main highway and drove for several hours to the nearest large town. Only there, under the glare of streetlights, did they feel relatively safe. They were filthy, scratched by branches. Emily was crying. Mark still trembled from the ordeal. They decided to report it to the police. The desk officer listened to their disjointed account of people transforming into wolves and being chased. Obvious skepticism was written on his face. He inspected their car, noting the broken side window and the deep scratches on the rear bumper. In the report he wrote, "Property damage by unknown persons or possibly wild animals, for example, bear." The police refused to travel to the remote village to investigate, citing it as too remote an area and lacking sufficient resources to look into such a fantastic story. Back home in Canada, Emily and Mark cut their trip short. The horror they experienced cast a heavy shadow over their relationship. They argued frequently, blaming each other for the recklessness that led them to that clearing. Mark began suffering from nightmares in which he himself underwent the agonizing transformation. Emily developed a phobic fear of darkness, forests, and the full moon. They never told anyone the full story of what happened in the Carpathians, fearing ridicule and disbelief. Later, Mark found online articles and forums mentioning strange cults practicing full moon rituals in remote Carpathian regions, as well as unsolved cases of tourists disappearing in those areas. But it was only fragmented information, offering no real answers. Chapter 7. Terror in the New York Subway. New York City's subterranean world is a complex labyrinth of active and abandoned subway tunnels, utility corridors, and forgotten spaces. For Alex, a 25-year-old programmer and urban exploration enthusiast, these depths held a special allure. He was drawn not only by the historical artifacts potentially hidden in disused sections of the subway, but also by the thrill, the sense of discovering uncharted corners of the metropolis. One Saturday night, Alex decided to explore a long-closed section of an old subway line beneath Brooklyn. This stretch had been decommissioned in the mid-20th century and was rumored to hold many points of interest. Equipped with a powerful headlamp, a GoPro camera mounted on his helmet, and a backpack containing basic tools, water, and energy bars, he accessed the system through an old ventilation shaft in an inconspicuous alley. Descending about 30 feet down a rusty ladder, he found himself in a spacious, echoing tunnel. The air was stale, smelling of dust, mold, and something else, vaguely unpleasant, indistinct. Alex switched on his camera and began moving deeper into the tunnel, his headlamp cutting through the darkness. The walls were coated in layers of grime, soot, and graffiti. Some of the markings were unusual, not standard street art tags, but archaic, crudely scratched symbols resembling runes, and primitive depictions of wolf or dog heads with bared fangs. The farther he walked, the more unsettling the atmosphere became. Strange sounds emanated from the tunnel's depths. a distant scraping of metal, as if something large was being dragged along the tracks, and a low, vibrating growl that echoed through the subterranean space. Alex initially dismissed it as noise from active subway lines nearby, or perhaps just the play of drafts. In one of the side tunnels branching off into complete darkness, his headlamp beam caught a pile of rags and old bones. The bones were large, some clearly human. He could make out a skull fragment and several ribs. Alex shivered. Probably the remains of some homeless person who had found their final refuge here. He didn't linger, and continued down the main tunnel. After about half a mile, he noticed movement ahead. At the far end of the tunnel, where it curved, something stirred in the dimness. Alex stopped and aimed his beam in that direction. The light illuminated a figure digging through a pile of refuse accumulated against the wall. It was an enormous creature, standing at least 7 feet tall even in its hunched position. It resembled a giant, emaciated wolf, but moved on 2 hind legs, though its long forelimbs nearly touched the ground. Its body was covered in sparse, patchy fur of a dirty gray color, through which pale, wrinkled skin showed in places. The creature slowly turned its head toward the light. It had a long, elongated muzzle filled with several rows of small, sharp teeth. Its eyes were small, deep-set, and glinted maliciously with red light. It held a gnawed bone in one clawed forepaw, disturbingly similar to a human femur. Alex froze, unable to move or make a sound. His brain refused to process what he was seeing. The camera on his helmet continued to dispassionately record the scene. The creature registered the light and Alex's motionless figure. It emitted a low, hissing growl, baring its fangs. Then, tossing the bone aside, it abruptly straightened and charged directly at Alex, moving with incredible speed for its size along the tracks and ties. The paralysis broke. Alex spun and ran back down the tunnel as fast as he possibly could. He heard the rapid click of claws on concrete and stone behind him, and the heavy, rasping breath of his pursuer. The distance between them was shrinking rapidly. He didn't look back, focusing entirely on running and not stumbling in the darkness beyond his headlamp's beam. The ventilation shaft he'd descended through was close now. He could see faint light filtering down from above. He reached the ladder and scrambled upward, moving hands and feet as quickly as possible. The heavy manhole cover above didn't yield easily, but adrenaline gave him strength. He burst out onto the surface, into the saving grime of the night alley, and slammed the cover shut behind him. He lay on the ground, gasping for breath, covered in dirt and sweat, shaking from the terrifying ordeal. Physically unharmed, but his psyche had taken a severe blow. He checked the camera. It had been recording the entire time. The file was saved. Back home, having regained some composure, Alex copied the video file to his computer with trembling hands. He watched the recording several times. The quality was far from perfect. The image shook during the run, the headlamp created glare, but the nightmare creature was visible clearly enough. Particularly chilling were the frames captured just before he turned and fled. A close-up of the hissing muzzle and burning eyes. After much hesitation, Alex decided to anonymously upload a short clip of the video, the clearest shots of the creature and the chase, to a forum dedicated to paranormal phenomena and cryptozoology. He didn't specify the exact location, only mentioning abandoned tunnels beneath New York City. The clip quickly gained traction and sparked heated debate. Some commenters claimed it was sophisticated CGI or a staged video. Others believed in its authenticity, dubbing the creature a tunnel beast, mole man, or something similar. Links appeared to old New York City urban legends about subterranean dwellers, mutants, or descendants of people who had gone to live underground. Alex tried contacting other urban explorers, asking in private chats if anyone had encountered anything similar in the NYC underground. Most brushed him off, considering his story a fabrication or a prank. Some shared their own tall tales, but they sounded clearly implausible. No one could corroborate his encounter. The experience permanently cured Alex of his desire to explore urban depths. He never went underground again. The video continued its life online, periodically resurfacing on various platforms, but official entities and the media ignored it. Alex lived with a constant, oppressive fear. He felt as though the creature might somehow remember his scent, his appearance. Could it reach the surface? He began avoiding subway travel, trying not to enter basements or underground parking garages. The encounter in the dark tunnel had left a deep scar on his mind. Chapter 8. The Party at Black Lake. New England is renowned for its picturesque lakes surrounded by dense forests. One such body of water was known among locals by the grim name Black Lake. It lay far from major roads and towns, and its reputation wasn't the best. There were stories of strange disappearances over the past half-century. Fishermen, tourists, tales of mysterious lights over the water at night, and of an inexplicable sense of dread that gripped many who lingered by its shores after sunset. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, the place attracted young people seeking solitude and thrills. A group of 6 college students, 3 guys, Ryan, Ben, Mike, and 3 girls, Jessica, Chloe, Olivia, decided to rent a small cabin on the shore of Black Lake for the weekend. Their plans were simple: throw a party with music, alcohol, and swimming in the lake under the full moon. The early autumn weather was perfect, warm days and cool, clear nights. They arrived Friday evening, unloaded their gear, and cranked up the music. With them was an old golden retriever named Buddy, who belonged to the cabin's owners. The party was in full swing. Music blared, beer flowed freely. Around midnight, Jessica and Ben, the most romantic couple in the group, decided to find some privacy and went for a walk toward the lake shore, about 100 yards away through a small patch of woods. They promised to be back soon. The others continued partying in the cabin and on the porch. About half an hour later, a piercing female scream erupted from the direction of the lake. It was filled with terror and cut off as suddenly as it began. The students on the porch exchanged glances. Ben probably decided to scare Jessica, Mike suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. Or they're just messing around, Chloe added. Yet the joke felt sinister to everyone. Almost immediately after the scream, a strange howl echoed from the woods surrounding the cabin. It was low, drawn out, and seemed to come from several directions at once. Buddy, who had been dozing peacefully at Ryan's feet, leaped up, the fur on his neck bristling. He growled, then began pacing nervously on the porch, whining with his tail tucked. Suddenly, the lights in the cabin and on the porch went out. Complete darkness enveloped them, broken only by the moonlight filtering through the trees. A tense silence fell, in which the crackling of branches very close to the house became audible. And then, something began trying to break in through the windows and the front door. Heavy blows rained down, the scrape of claws on wood and glass, a low, furious roar. Panic seized the remaining 4 students. They scrambled inside the house. Ryan ran to the window facing the porch and peered cautiously through a gap between the wooden shutters they had prudently closed earlier. In the moonlight, he saw a nightmarish scene. An enormous dark creature taller than the door was forcing its way in. It stood on its hind legs, its body covered in thick fur, its eyes glowing red. It slammed a clawed paw against the door with incredible force, trying to break it down. Ryan shifted his gaze to another window and saw a second, identical creature clawing at the glass and frame. There are 2 of them. They're trying to get in, he yelled. They had to act fast. Mike and Ryan dragged a heavy oak table and shoved it against the door, barricading the entrance. Chloe and Olivia checked all the windows, ensuring the shutters were tightly closed and latched. They huddled together in the corner of the farthest room, a windowless bedroom, trembling with fear. They could hear the creatures moving around the house. Heavy footsteps on the wooden porch, the scrape of claws against the walls, furious growls and snuffling sounds near the windows. Periodically, heavy blows struck the shutters in the door. Buddy, frantic with terror, darted around the house. At one point, he ran into a small pantry with a tiny, unshuttered window. They heard him crash into the glass in panic. It shattered. The dog leaped outside. Almost immediately, a short, final yelp came from outside, followed by silence. The siege lasted all night. The students sat in the darkness, afraid to move, listening to every sound outside. It felt like the night would never end. Only when the first rays of dawn painted the eastern sky did the sounds outside the cabin begin to fade. Gradually, everything fell silent. They sat in tense silence for another hour, afraid to believe the nightmare was over. Finally, Ryan cautiously moved the table from the door and peered outside. All was quiet. The sun was rising over the forest. They emerged from the cabin. The sight was frightening. The front door was heavily damaged, covered in deep scratches and claw marks. The wooden shutters on the windows were also scratched and broken in places. Around the house, enormous paw prints resembling wolf tracks but much larger were visible in the damp earth. The tracks led from the forest to the house and back again. Jessica and Ben were nowhere to be found. Their footprints, mixed with the strange paw prints, led from the house toward the lake shore. There, at the water's edge, the tracks simply ended. There were no signs of a struggle on the bank. Buddy, too, had vanished without a trace. They found an old landline phone in the cabin, which thankfully worked. They called the police. Arriving officers and rescue teams began an investigation and a search operation. The lake and the surrounding woods were thoroughly examined. On the shore, near where the tracks ended, they found Ben's torn denim jacket and one of Jessica's sneakers. Divers searched the lake bottom near the shore but found no bodies. The primary theory of the investigation became accidental drowning. It was presumed that Jessica and Ben, likely intoxicated, had gone swimming, succumbed to the cold water or current, and drowned. Their bodies might have been carried into deeper water. An attack by wild animals, a bear or wolf pack, was considered a secondary possibility, explaining the dog's disappearance and a potential attack on the couple near the water. The testimonies of Ryan, Mike, Chloe and Olivia about monsters besieging the cabin were met with disbelief. Police attributed their accounts to alcohol, drugs, though tests were negative, and mass hysteria triggered by their friend's disappearance and the strange noises from the woods. Tufts of dark fur found snagged on splinters in the door were sent for analysis, but the result was again inconclusive. Biological material of animal origin, species undetermined. The surviving students suffered severe psychological trauma. Their friendship was shattered. Jessica and Ben's parents blamed them for negligence and indirect involvement in their children's deaths. Ryan couldn't forget what he'd seen through the shutter gap. He claimed that at one point when one of the creatures turned its head, he thought he saw something vaguely familiar in its features. He wasn't sure, but he felt like he might have seen that person, or whoever it had been, before, briefly, in the small settlement by the road they passed on their way to the lake. But these were just vague feelings without any proof. The mystery of Black Lake remained unsolved. Chapter 9. The Digital Ghost from the Backwoods. Daniel was a journalist of the new era. 30 years old, he ran a popular blog and YouTube channel dedicated to debunking hoaxes, urban legends, and pseudoscientific theories. His creed was skepticism, facts, and logic. He relished investigating UFO sightings, ghost encounters, or Bigfoot reports, methodically dissecting them and proving their mundane, often banal origins. One day, browsing a little-known internet forum dedicated to cryptozoology and paranormal phenomena, he stumbled upon a series of posts from an anonymous user. The posts were written in an anxious tone and described several alleged encounters with a creature resembling a werewolf in a specific rural county in Missouri within the Ozark Plateau region. This area was known for its dense forests, isolated communities, and conservative inhabitants. The poster claimed the creature was aggressive, responsible for missing livestock, and possibly even missing people. Attached to the posts were several blurry photographs, barely showing a dark silhouette in the woods, and a short audio recording of an eerie, drawn-out howl. Daniel immediately seized upon the story. It was perfect material for his next exposé. He was convinced the photos were fakes or accidental shots of a bear. The howl was lifted from some horror movie, and the entire story was the fabrication of a local eccentric or an attempt to attract tourists. He decided to travel to the specified county, conduct his own investigation, and write a scathing piece on modern superstitions and the power of internet hoaxes. Arriving in the small town serving as the county seat, Daniel rented an RV to use as a base for his forays into the woods. He started by interviewing locals, introducing himself as a journalist, gathering material on local folklore. The reaction was mixed. Most people became withdrawn and tight-lipped as soon as he mentioned strange occurrences in the forest. Some waved him off, saying it was just tall tales for tourists, but others, especially the elderly, lowered their voices and spoke of a wood spirit, the thing that lives in the woods, or the dog head, warning him not to disturb it. They spoke reluctantly, glancing nervously over their shoulders. Daniel also spoke with the local sheriff. He confirmed recent incidents of livestock being brutally killed on several remote farms. Officially, these were attributed to coyote packs or a cougar, although the sheriff admitted in an off-the-record conversation that the nature of the damage to the carcasses was a typical excessive force, strange tearing wounds. He hadn't heard of recent human disappearances, but mentioned that people had vanished in these woods before, lost hunters or hikers. Using geotags and descriptions from the forum posts, Daniel located several spots where the creature had allegedly been seen or its tracks found. These were remote, neglected corners of the forest, far from trails and roads. In one such place, near an old creek where a mutilated cow had recently been found, he discovered a strange symbol carved into the trunk of a large oak tree. A crudely etched circle with 3 diagonal slashes inside. He photographed it but couldn't determine its meaning. Deciding to employ his standard methods, Daniel purchased several modern trail cameras equipped with motion sensors and wireless data transmission. He set them up at the 3 most active locations according to the forum posts, camouflaging them with branches and leaves. He positioned himself in his RV about half a mile from the nearest camera, in a small clearing off an abandoned logging road. He planned to spend several nights there, monitoring the camera signals and recording any suspicious sounds. The first night was quiet. On the second night, nearing midnight, he heard the howl. The exact same one from the online audio recording. A long, wild, blood-curdling sound echoed through the night forest. It came from the direction of one of his trail cams. Daniel checked the signal on his laptop. 2 cameras were functioning normally, transmitting static nighttime images of the woods. But the third camera, the one in the direction the howl had come from, was no longer transmitting. The signal was gone. Despite an internal sense of unease, Daniel decided to go check on the camera. Perhaps the batteries had died, or there was an equipment malfunction. Grabbing a powerful flashlight and a heavy wrench for self-defense, he left the RV and headed into the woods, following the GPS trail. Approaching the camera's location, he saw it had been torn from the tree and smashed. The plastic casing was broken, the lens cracked. Someone or something had clearly destroyed it deliberately. At that moment, he heard the loud snap of branches very close by, in the dense thicket to his right. He whipped the flashlight beam in that direction. For a split second before it vanished into the undergrowth, he saw a huge dark figure. It was massive, covered in fur, and moving on 2 legs hunched over. The figure flashed between the trees in the moonlight and was gone. Fear, unlike anything he had ever experienced, gripped Daniel. This wasn't a theoretical danger. It was a real threat. He turned and walked quickly back toward his RV, constantly looking over his shoulder, sweeping the darkness around him with his flashlight. Reaching the RV, he locked all the doors and windows. His heart pounded. He sat in the darkness, listening. After a while, he heard footsteps outside. Someone or something was slowly circling the RV. Then came a scraping sound, the noise of claws on the vehicle's metal body. This continued for several minutes, then silence fell. Daniel didn't sleep until dawn. In the morning, with the sun well up, he ventured outside. Vague, large tracks were visible on the ground around the RV, but identifying them was difficult. He tried to start the engine to leave, but the vehicle wouldn't start. Opening the hood, he discovered the thick ignition wires had been chewed through, as if by powerful jaws. He had to hike out of the woods, leaving the RV behind. He took the memory card from the smashed trail cam with him. Reaching town, the first thing he did was check the card. The camera had managed to capture a few images before being destroyed. The final frames, taken an instant before impact, showed a blurry dark silhouette and part of an enormous clawed paw reaching for the lens. Daniel reported the vandalism and property damage to the police. The sheriff listened, sent a deputy out to the RV, but finding the culprits was, of course, impossible. The tracks around the RV had already been washed away by overnight rain. Daniel tried again to find the anonymous user who had posted on the forum. But the account had been deleted, all posts were gone, and no trace of the author could be found. The meaning of the symbol carved on the tree remained a mystery. He returned home and wrote the article about his trip, but it turned out very different from the scathing expose he had originally planned. He honestly described what he had encountered: the locals' hostility, the unexplained livestock killings, the strange howl, the smashed camera, the chewed wires, and the fleeting glimpse of a massive figure in the woods. He included the photos of the symbol and the frames from the trail cam. The article concluded not with a categorical debunking, but with an admission that something strange and inexplicable was happening in the deep woods of the Ozarks, something that defied conventional logic. A few days after the article was published, he received an anonymous email. It contained only one sentence: "Stay out of things that don't concern you. You don't know what you're playing with." Daniel's skepticism had been severely shaken. He couldn't forget the primal fear he had felt in those woods. Chapter 10. A Scar to Remember. Alaska. The vast wilderness of Alaska, a land of untamed nature and harsh challenges. Here, in one of the immense national parks, worked Rachel, a 35-year-old woman, a dedicated employee of the National Park Service. The season was nearing its end. The tourist flow had dried up, and the park was preparing for winter closure. Rachel was conducting the last patrol of the year in one of the most remote sections of the park, a sprawling valley surrounded by mountains, seldom visited even by experienced hikers. She navigated the barely visible trails on an ATV, checking infrastructure and observing wildlife. The day was clear but cold, the air crisp and transparent. Radio communication in this part of the park was unreliable, often cutting out due to the terrain. Rachel was an experienced professional, accustomed to working alone in wild conditions. But today a faint sense of unease lingered. Passing a small grove of aspens near a freezing creek, she noticed signs of a recent tragedy. The remains of an enormous moose lay in the clearing. What was left of the mighty animal had been torn apart with incredible savagery. Chunks of meat and hide were scattered around, bones snapped. This didn't look like the work of wolves or a grizzly bear, the usual predators here. They typically killed quickly and consumed their prey more neatly. Here there was a sense of senseless, excessive fury. Rachel dismounted and approached cautiously, surveying the scene. Snow, which had fallen lightly the day before, preserved tracks around the carcass. They were huge, resembling wolf tracks, but significantly larger, about 12 inches long. The claw impressions were longer and deeper than those of any predator she knew in Alaska, and the tracks were paired, as if the creature moved on two legs, although prints from all four limbs were visible in places. Suddenly, Rachel felt a sharp pang of anxiety, almost panic. The familiar feeling from years working in the wild, the sensation of being watched. She slowly scanned her surroundings, peering into the wall of dense spruce trees at the edge of the clearing. Nothing. She reached for the radio clipped to her shoulder to report the finding to base. Pressing the transmit button yielded only loud crackling and static hiss. No signal. In that same instant, erupting from the trees with a deafening roar, a creature burst into the clearing. It was immense, massive, standing at least 8 feet tall on its hind legs. Its body was covered in thick, matted fur of a dark brown, almost black color. Its muzzle was elongated, wolf-like, but with a heavier jaw and short, erect ears. Its maw gaped wide in a furious roar, revealing rows of long, yellowish fangs. Its eyes burned with a vicious, almost intelligent red fire. The creature stood on powerful hind legs, but its long forelimbs, tipped with enormous black claws, were tensed, ready to shift to a four-legged run or strike at any moment. It was not a wolf, nor a bear. It was something else, primal and filled with untamable rage. Rachel had no time to react, no time to draw her flare gun or the can of bear spray always clipped to her belt. In a single bound, the creature crossed the 20 yards separating them and knocked her off her feet with a powerful shoulder blow. She landed hard on her back, her head striking the frozen ground. The air rushed from her lungs. The creature loomed over her, emitting a gurgling snarl, its hot breath reeking of carrion and blood. A brief, desperate struggle ensued. Rachel instinctively threw up her arms, trying to push the heavy mass away. She kicked. She screamed. At one point, her hand scrabbled on the ground and found a thick, broken branch. Without thinking, she grabbed it and thrust the sharp end with all her might toward the creature's face, aiming for an eye. She connected. The creature howled in pain, a high, piercing cry that held an almost human note of suffering. It recoiled, pawing at its injured eye, from which dark blood flowed. That momentary respite gave Rachel her chance. She scrambled to her feet and bolted toward her ATV. During the brief struggle, the creature had swiped her left forearm with its clawed paw. Her clothing was torn, blood pouring from a deep gash. She reached the ATV, jumped on, and tore away, not looking back. She pushed the machine across the rugged terrain as fast as it would go until she reached the nearest ranger outpost, several miles from the attack site. There was a permanent radio station there. Bleeding profusely in a state of shock, she managed to contact base and call for help. She was evacuated by helicopter to the nearest hospital. The wound on her arm was serious, 3 deep parallel gouges left by the claws. Doctors stitched and treated the wound. Rachel told the medics and the arriving park security officers about the monster attack, describing the creature in detail. Her account was recorded but treated with understandable skepticism. Rangers immediately went to the scene. They found signs of the struggle, Rachel's blood on the snow and rocks. They also found spots of other blood, dark, almost black, belonging to the attacking creature. They found the broken branch Rachel had used, bearing traces of blood and several coarse dark brown hairs. And they found the huge tracks leading from the clearing deep into unexplored mountain territory. Officially, the incident was registered as an attack on a park employee by an unusually aggressive grizzly bear or an unknown wolf subspecies. Samples of the creature's blood and hair, as well as biological material swabbed from Rachel's wound during treatment, were sent to a forensic lab for analysis. The result, as in many similar cases, was inconclusive. Biological material of animal origin, species undetermined. Rachel recovered physically relatively quickly, but an ugly, prominent scar remained on her left forearm, 3 long, whitish stripes. the psychological consequences were far more severe. She was tormented by nightmares, reliving the attack over and over. But there was something else, more disturbing. Weeks after her release from the hospital, she began noticing strange changes in herself. Her hearing and sense of smell sharpened to an unnatural degree. She could hear the faintest rustles through walls, distinguish scents from great distances. An inexplicable, uncharacteristic irritability emerged, along with flashes of aggression, particularly intensifying around the full moon. The scar on her arm sometimes began to itch and ache for no apparent physical reason, the skin around it darkening. Doctors she consulted attributed these symptoms to post-traumatic stress disorder, phantom pains, and hormonal changes. But Rachel felt something else was happening. She began to suspect the scratch hadn't been just an injury. That, along with the claws, the creature had transmitted something else to her. Something dark and alien. She started to fear herself, to fear the changes occurring within her. She resigned from the National Park Service and left Alaska. She settled in a secluded cabin in the mountains of another state, far from people, trying to understand and learn to control what was happening to her. Her fate since then remains unknown.